Trump's own people are telling him not to do it. Not the Democrats, not the media, not foreign governments, his own advisors. Inside the White House right now, senior officials and a Republican campaign strategist are sounding the economic alarm loudly. According to a Reuters investigation published this week, White House aides privately warned Trump about escalation. Their message is blunt. A military conflict with Iran carries enormous economic risk heading into the 2026 midterms. They want him focused on the cost of living and grocery prices at home, not on warships and ultimatums to Tehran. That single detail should stop you for a moment because it tells you something no press conference will say out loud. The people who see the full classified picture, Trump's own inner circle, are more worried about inflation than missiles. Not just worried about the military risks of a campaign going wrong, worried about what hits American wallets the morning after. Here's the number at the center of all of this, the one that almost never gets mentioned clearly enough in the coverage. The Federation of American Scientists published a formal economic analysis of what U.S. military action against Iran would cost. Their finding? Even a limited strike scenario could cost the global economy somewhere between $60 billion and $2 trillion. That is not a fringe estimate from a think tank no one has heard of. That is the stated range, in the first 3 months alone. Now set that number against what oil markets are doing right now, on February 25th, before a single strike has occurred. Brent crude has already climbed sharply since January, with war risk premium baked into every barrel being traded today. Oxford Economics modeled a full closure of the Strait of Hormuz and published a specific number, $130 per barrel of oil. They also modeled what that does to American consumers. U.S. inflation climbing towards 6% as a direct consequence. The Dallas Federal Reserve published an independent scenario analysis that arrived at the same fundamental conclusion. A full strait closure sends WTI crude toward $100 per barrel and adds 1.3 percentage points to annualized U.S. headline inflation. Their timeline is 6 months from the point of disruption beginning, and that is the official published finding from Dallas Fed. At that level, this stops being a foreign policy debate. It becomes your mortgage rate, your grocery receipt, your gas pump. And here is what separates this moment from every previous Iran crisis in the past 2 decades, the scale of what is deployed. The U.S. military buildup in the Middle East right now is the largest assembled in that region since the Iraq invasion of 2003. 2 carrier strike groups, B-2 stealth bombers pre-positioned at Diego Garcia, F-35s forward deployed, submarines already in position. This is not a show of force designed to function as a bluff. This is a machine that was built and deployed specifically to strike. But that machine now carries an economic shadow attached to it. And in my view, that shadow is larger than the military itself. Rystad Energy's chief economist told Fortune magazine that a contained conflict, even one that avoids the strait entirely, pushes crude oil up $15 to $20 per barrel above where it is sitting right now, before any shots have been fired at all. Any actual disruption that reaches the Strait of Hormuz forces prices above $100 per barrel, according to the same analysis. Capital Economics estimates that $100 oil adds approximately 1 full percentage point to U.S. consumer price inflation directly. For a president who campaigned on cheap energy, cheap gas, and a lower cost of living, this creates a direct contradiction. In my view, that contradiction is the true center of this standoff, and Trump's own advisors understand it better than anyone. There is one more layer that almost no outlet has clearly connected yet, and it begins with American shale production itself. WTI crude is currently trading in the $60 to $67 range, sitting almost exactly at the break-even level for U.S. shale drillers. Below $60 per barrel, a meaningful portion of domestic U.S. drilling operations become economically unviable almost immediately. So this administration is simultaneously trying to keep oil cheap enough to fight inflation and expensive enough to protect shale. It also needs prices low enough to pressure Iran, a government that requires $164 per barrel, just to balance its own budget. Per IMF data, 3 separate targets, 1 commodity, 1 impossibly narrow band to navigate without breaking something else. A military escalation makes holding all 3 of those targets at the same time structurally impossible. That is the actual trap. Not in the water near Iran, not in the geography of the strait, in the cold arithmetic of global energy markets themselves. What this suggests is that Trump's advisors raising internal alarms may be capturing the real risk more clearly than the hawks. The question that doesn't have a clean answer yet, whether the political logic of this moment has already outrun the economic one. Drop a comment right now before we go further. Do you think the economic math eventually forces a deal, or does Trump strike? I read every single comment on stories like this one. This question is live, unresolved, and I want your read on where it goes. If this kind of layered analysis is what you come here for, hit the like button now. It helps this content reach more people. Because in part 2, we open up exactly what Iran is positioned in that water. beneath the surface and on the strategic islands sitting directly in the middle of the strait. The fast boats get all the media attention. What's actually there is far more dangerous. Here is what almost every mainstream outlet keeps missing about Iran's actual position in the strait right now. Iran does not need to sink a single American warship anywhere to win the next phase of this standoff. Not one vessel. What Iran needs is far simpler and far harder to counter. Make the cost of entering that water feel unacceptable. And to do that, Iran has spent years quietly assembling something that most Western reporting consistently walks right past. The fast boats get all the camera time and all the headlines. The submarines, mines, and islands are the real story. Let's start underwater, because that is where Iran's most strategically significant assets are positioned today. Iran currently operates one of the most diverse submarine fleets in the Middle East, estimated at 28 to 30 vessels. That fleet includes Russian-built Kilo-class submarines, the semi-heavy Fateh-class, and roughly 20 Ghadar-class midgets. The Ghadar is the one that matters most inside the strait, and it was purpose-built for exactly this geography. It displaces roughly 125 tons submerged, stretches 29 meters from bow to stern, and runs on a crew of just 7 sailors. On paper, those numbers sound unimpressive. Inside the Persian Gulf's shallow, acoustically chaotic waters, they're an advantage. Here is why the Gulf's physics change everything for a vessel like the Ghadar, and why larger is not better here. The Persian Gulf is not open ocean. It's a bathtub, hot, shallow, layered with salinity gradients and seabed clutter. In deep Atlantic water, American anti-submarine warfare is essentially unmatched. That's not a debatable point. In 200 feet of turbulent Gulf water, the acoustic environment degrades every advantage that deep ocean sonar gives the U.S. Navy. Detection ranges shrink, false contacts multiply. A small battery-running submarine becomes nearly impossible to distinguish from terrain. The Ghadir's doctrine exploits this directly. It doesn't hunt its targets across open water. It simply waits for them. The navigable shipping lanes through the strait's narrowest point measure roughly 2 miles wide in each direction. Every vessel, warship, carrier escort, or commercial supertanker, must transit those same predictable, unavoidable lanes. A Ghadir positioned near the Iranian coastline inside that 2-mile channel doesn't need range. The target arrives on schedule. According to open-source defense assessments updated in early 2026, Iran has deployed more than 20 of these submarines. They are positioned along predictable U.S. carrier approach routes, not randomly, but with documented tactical intent. Each Ghadir carries 2 533mm torpedo tubes capable of firing the Valfajr, a domestically built Iranian heavyweight torpedo. The class is also assessed as capable of covert mine-laying and inserting special operations forces without surfacing. In February 2026, Iranian state media confirmed the Fateh-class submarine launched cruise missiles during live-fire drills. That is not a static fleet doing symbolic exercises. That is an operational system demonstrating current, confirmed capability. But here is the piece that U.S. defense analysts consistently flag as the most dangerous element. And it isn't the submarines. According to U.S. military intelligence estimates cited across multiple sources, Iran holds between 5,000 and 6,000 naval mines. That number has not shrunk under sanctions. By most assessments, it has grown. Let that number sit for a moment, because the critical insight here is not about detonating mines. It's about what happens the moment credible ones appear. In July 2025, U.S. intelligence detected Iran loading naval mines onto vessels in the Persian Gulf after Israeli strikes. The mines were not deployed into the water. They didn't need to be. The loading itself was detected within hours. That detection was enough to raise alarm across every insurance desk and tanker operations room that tracks the region. Here is the exact mechanism, and it is important to understand it clearly because it's the economic lever in this story. The moment credible intelligence emerges that Iran has begun seeding mines, maritime insurers pull coverage almost immediately. According to a shipping industry analysis published after June 2025, war risk premiums spiked from 0.125% to up to 0.7% of a vessel's value per voyage in the hours after news of the Iranian military operations hit the wire. Not days, hours. For a very large crude carrier, that translates to $200,000 to $360,000 in additional cost for a single transit. At that level, the economics of transiting the strait shift almost immediately for every cargo and every captain. You do not need to detonate a mine to stop traffic. You need only to make the insurance calculation become unworkable. Maersk, Hapag-Lloyd, and CMA-CGM all activated emergency clauses in their contracts after the June 2025 operations. That is the architecture. Not a navy designed to fight the U.S. fleet, a system designed to make the strait ungovernable. And Iran has one more layer that was demonstrated explicitly in February 2026, one sitting in plain geographical sight. 3 islands sit directly in the middle of the strait: Abu Musa, Greater Tunb, and Lesser Tunb. Iran has held them since 1971. From those islands, Iran operates armed drones, surveillance systems, and coastal missile units already inside the engagement zone. The IRGC Navy used the Smart Control of the Strait of Hormuz drill on February 16th to test exactly this infrastructure. The drill included live surface firing, missile tests from the Iranian coast, and a temporary closure of inbound shipping lanes. Iranian state media framed it as readiness. What it actually demonstrated was the mechanism of closure, stripped of its consequences. The IRGC Navy commander stated publicly that Iranian forces could close the waterway upon orders from senior leadership. That is not bluster. That is a chain of command confirming an authorization process that already exists and functions. What this suggests, when you look at all of it together, is a system that was designed around one specific operational insight. You don't need to win a battle with the United States Navy. You need to make the strait feel ungovernable long enough for oil markets to spike, long enough for insurance to pull out, long enough for the political math in Washington to shift from what can we strike to what does the morning after cost the American economy and the midterm elections. 20 submarines, 6,000 mines, 3 islands, and a drill that tested the shutdown mechanism on February 16th. That is not improvisation. That is a system built over years, tested in live conditions, and positioned right now as of today. In Part 3, we're going to look at what Russia and China bring to the same geography. And it is not what most people expect. Russia's surface presence is limited. What it adds cannot be replicated by any weapon. China brought something far more dangerous. Now let's talk about what Russia and China actually bring to this geography, because it's not what most people expect. Most coverage of this standoff focuses on Iran's assets. That's understandable. Iran is the country in the crosshairs. But the military environment around those 2 American carrier strike groups changed fundamentally the week of February 17th, and the reason it changed had nothing to do with Iranian submarines or island-based drone platforms. It had to do with a ship. On February 17th, China's People's Liberation Army Navy positioned its forces alongside Russia and Iran in the strait. The formation includes at least 2 Chinese destroyers and 1 vessel that matters more than any warship in that water. The Liaowang 1, China's dedicated signals intelligence ship, was confirmed as part of the deployed formation. Its job is not to shoot anything. Its job is to watch everything. Radar signatures, communications, carrier movement, timing. Every American ship in the region generates an electromagnetic signature. The Liaowang 1's entire mission is to catalog them. The data that vessel collects does not stay on the ship. The question of who receives it answers itself strategically. Now pair that surveillance ship with the other key Chinese asset confirmed in this theater, the Type 055 destroyer. China's Type 055 displaces over 13,000 tons and carries 112 vertical launch cells, among the largest in any navy in the world. Those cells can hold long-range surface-to-air missiles, anti-ship cruise missiles, and, as of December 2025, something new. Chinese state media released live footage in December 2025 of a Type 055 destroyer firing the YJ-20 hypersonic missile. The plan described the footage as a finalization test, meaning the system was at or near operational deployment status. The YJ-20 is a hypersonic aeroballistic anti-ship missile. Its terminal speed is assessed at above Mach 5 at point of impact. That terminal phase is what matters most, because it compresses the defensive response window from minutes to seconds. Here's the architecture the U.S. Navy built its entire surface defense system around: subsonic and supersonic inbound threats. The Aegis combat system, the most advanced integrated naval defense platform in service anywhere, was designed for exactly that. Against a Mach 5 plus maneuvering terminal approach coming in on a near vertical angle, the intercept geometry changes entirely. USNI News reported that defense analyst Ben Lewis called the YJ-20 notable because of its ability to maneuver upon re-entry. His exact assessment: that maneuvering capability makes defending against it much more complicated for existing systems. The U.S. Navy publicly acknowledged this capability gap in congressional testimony as recently as 2024, and it remains unresolved. So what you have right now in those waters is this: a Chinese destroyer carrying a weapon the American fleet has no confirmed operational defense against, positioned alongside a signals intelligence ship tracking every carrier movement in real time. In my view, that specific combination is the single most significant military development of this entire standoff. Not the drones, not the Iranian fast boats, the Type 055, the Liaowang 1, and what those 2 vessels do together as an integrated system. One provides the targeting picture. The other provides a strike option that existing naval defenses cannot reliably stop. Now, let's look at Russia, because Russia's contribution surprises most analysts once they look past the surface-level headlines. Russia's deployed formation is modest in size. the Baltic Fleet corvette Stoiky and the Pacific Fleet frigate Marshal Shaposhnikov. Compared to what China and Iran have in those waters, Russia's surface hardware is not the point of its presence here. What Russia contributes is something neither China nor Iran can replicate independently, and it requires no weapon to function. The first contribution is diplomatic geometry. Russia is a permanent member of the UN Security Council, holding veto authority. When Russia is physically present in this exercise alongside China, this stops being a regional drill Washington can dismiss. It becomes a trilateral deployment of 2 nuclear-armed Permanent Security Council members operating alongside Iran simultaneously. Every public statement the Pentagon makes, every justification Washington offers for action, now has to account for that framing. You cannot call this a rogue state provocation. You cannot treat it as a regional problem with a contained local response. The second contribution is more specific and less discussed. Russia's battle-tested electronic warfare capabilities in the field. 3 years of active conflict in Ukraine generated something no laboratory program produces: real combat iteration cycles. Russian electronic warfare systems were tested against NATO-supplied equipment, updated in the field, and retested under fire. According to Defense Security Asia's analysis of Maritime Security Belt 2026, the 2025 edition explicitly included EEW simulations. Those simulations in 2025 used electronic warfare concepts drawn directly from operational experience in the Ukrainian theater. In a naval context, electronic warfare means radar jamming, GPS spoofing, communications disruption, and sensor interference. Carrier strike groups depend on layered sensor networks for situational awareness. Degrading those networks changes the picture. Tom Shughart, a retired U.S. Navy submarine warfare officer and analyst at CNAS, was direct about Russia's practical contribution. He told the War Zone this week that Russian and Chinese sensors present in the Strait could give Iran advance warning of a strike. In his words, planners would need to ensure those platforms aren't in the way, and that their sensors don't tip off Tehran. That is not a theoretical concern from an academic. That is a retired submarine warfare officer describing an operational problem. Now step back and look at what these 3 navies contribute when you assess them as a combined system rather than 3 separate ones. Iran provides the geography, the mines, the submarines, the islands, the instruments that make the strait costly to enter. China provides the surveillance umbrella, the long-range hypersonic strike reach, and a direct economic stake of its own. Approximately 40% of China's total oil imports move through this strait. Beijing is not here purely as a diplomatic signal. Russia provides electronic warfare depth, nuclear diplomatic weight, and the framing that transforms this into something much larger. None of these 3 countries holds a formal mutual defense treaty with the others. There is no Article 5 equivalent here. But there is something that may matter more than any treaty signed in a conference room: 8 consecutive years of exercises. Maritime Security Belt 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025, 2026. 8 iterations in the same geography. The 2023 edition introduced drone integration and nighttime operations. The 2024 drills added live fire components. The 2025 exercises included electronic warfare simulations for the first time, a direct import from the Ukrainian battlefield. Each iteration built on the last, shared communication protocols, common tactical procedures, familiarity with each other's timing. 8 years of exercises don't describe a coalition. They demonstrate one, and that distinction is what planners are working with. And here's the piece almost no outlet connected this week. This exercise didn't start in the Strait of Hormuz in February. In January 2026, Russia, China, Iran, the UAE, and South Africa conducted joint naval drills in the South Atlantic Ocean. The exercise was called Will for Peace 2026, and it was framed explicitly as the first BRICS naval operation in history. Nikolai Patrushev, Putin's senior aide and chairman of Russia's Maritime Board, described what came next in unambiguous terms. In a February 17th interview, he said BRICS should now be given what he called a full-fledged strategic maritime dimension. That phrase, strategic maritime dimension, is not diplomatic boilerplate. It describes an institutional architectural decision. BRICS began as an economic conversation. Development banks, trade routes, alternatives to dollar-denominated settlement systems. South Atlantic in January. Strait of Hormuz in February. Same calendar month, many of the same governments, 2 separate oceans. What this suggests is that the economic project and the military posture are being deliberately stitched together in real time. In part 4, we're going to look at what the economic architecture underneath all of this actually means for the United States. Not for oil markets in the abstract, for inflation, for shale producers, for the midterm elections, and for the Situation Room. So here's where everything actually lands on February 25th, 2026. the exact day this video goes live on this channel. Trump's 10 to 15 day deadline, issued from Air Force One on February 20th, now expires somewhere in very early March. ING Bank published a market note this week stating the deadline works out to a date sometime in very early March, precisely. ING analysts added that oil markets will continue to price in a large risk premium and stay sensitive to every fresh development. Brent crude rose to $71.13 per barrel on Wednesday, near a 7-month high. Purely on that uncertainty alone, Iran says a deal is within reach. The White House says the two sides remain apart on some issues. Both can be true. What analysts at Signum Global Advisors described as a coming diplomatic opportunity now runs directly into a wall. The IAEA board meets in Vienna on March the 2nd, almost exactly when Trump's countdown clock hits 0 simultaneously. Bloomberg reported this week that a new resolution could refer Iran to the UN Security Council at that same meeting. That calendar overlap is not accidental. In June 2025, Israel launched strikes within 24 hours of an IAEA censure. The mechanism that triggered the last escalation is scheduled to activate again at the exact same moment as the deadline. Jason Brodsky of United Against Nuclear Iran told Fox News this week what the administration privately believes internally. His read: Trump's team holds deep skepticism that negotiations will produce any outcome they find acceptable at all. In his words, the talks may be buying time to make sure the appropriate military assets are in position, not for a deal. The Wall Street Journal reported that Trump is actively reviewing targeted military options executable within days right now. That is not background noise. That is a sitting president reviewing strike packages while talks are technically still ongoing. What this entire picture suggests is not a story about war or diplomacy as separate tracks. They are the same track. The military buildup is the negotiation. The deadline is the leverage. The three navies in the strait are the cost signal. And the $300 billion economic trap sitting underneath all of it is the reason no one in that situation room wants to pull the trigger without fully understanding what the morning after looks like for oil markets, for inflation, and for the 2026 midterm elections. Here's the question no analyst has cleanly answered, and it is the one that actually determines what happens next. Is Trump's deadline a genuine countdown to military action, or is it a pressure instrument designed to force a better deal? The honest answer, based on everything available today, is that no one outside that situation room knows for certain yet. What we do know is this: the clock is real, the ships are real, the economic math is real, and early March is very close. Drop a comment below. Do you think a deal gets done before early March, or does this go somewhere more dangerous? I read every comment on stories like this. If this kind of analysis is what you come here for, subscribe right now. Because this story is not over, and based on the timeline in play, the next major development could arrive before this weekend's.